Hello, everyone. This is our presentation on attachment theory on this week's topic of infant development. And my name is Angelica Ochoa.
My name is Aragon.
And my name is Geneka Jacobo. So I'm going to move to our next slide here. So I just want to give a brief overview of attachment theory and how it relates to infants. Early attachment relationships can influence a child's basic sense of themselves as lovable and worthy of attention, of others as trustworthy and unreliable, and as the world as safe and an interesting place. Infants who experience poor support from their caregivers are uncertain of their caregivers' responses, are less likely than infants in supportive relationships to engage in active exploration of the physical and social environment. And we'll talk a little bit about why that matters in our presentation. And then just the last bullet point to consider when watching our presentation, the attachment relationship between a primary caregiver and the infant is an important aspect of infant development to consider when designing and delivering interventions to promote a positive development for the infant.
So some of the cultural and social justice implications of using this theory as social workers to consider are that this theory was developed by and for white individuals and also in a westernized culture. So when we're thinking cross-culturally, we can't apply this as a universal hypothesis. And this is something that has been done in the past. So just to consider as we think about using this theory in practice, how we can be culturally competent and culturally aware in order to use this and not do harm. There's also a feminist critique of this theory due to the significant emphasis that's placed on the primary caregiver, which traditionally was mothers. And just with the way that this theory has been applied and researched, there is a lot of almost blame given to the primary caregiver if an insecure attachment is formed due to their child rearing practices, not accounting for the different things that can be happening for caregivers while they're taking care of infants. And then in this third bullet, kind of thinking about that in order for an infant to have their needs best met, the caregivers need to also have their needs met. And although in this module we're talking about infant development, a lot of it really falls back to their caregivers and the people who are helping them through their development, whether this is a parent or guardian or even children in the foster system. That is something that when we're taking a critical perspective of attachment theory, we have to consider those different primary caregivers that children might have. We have to consider the mental health of their primary caregivers, as well as their interaction with their social determinants of health, like housing and food. So these all have direct implications on how attachments are formed and how we as social workers should use this theory in practice.
And when looking at attachment theory itself, it's important to recognize that the attachment styles can be categorized um, in two different categories. The secure attachment, which is just covers the secure attachment, and insecure attachment, which covers the other three, being anxious, avoidant, and disorganized. Um, And when you look at the four attachment styles, it's important to look at it through two axes, which can be represented through that picture. The x axis being the model of self, while the y axis is the model of others. Similar can be said to the parenting styles for these attachments, and they would be displayed in the same category or in the same box that the attachment styles in. For example, for a secure child who's positive on both self and on others, meaning very low anxiety and very low avoidance, the authoritative sorry, excuse me, authoritative parenting style will also be in the same grid, being low anxiety, low avoidance area, as you can see there, where the child's very happy and the parents very happy as well. Um, so yeah. And then looking at through a social worker's perspective, it's important to recognize that, like Angelica said, with it being a westernized theory, the circumstances of every family are different due to their culture, due to different factors. Can be anywhere from whether it's a low socioeconomic status home, it's a single parent's home, um, and a bunch of other different factors. And these factors um, aren't really looked into when you look at this theory, because in from a generic view, the theory is very simplistic, just indicating the way you parent your child will result in the way that these children get attached to different people. But again, that doesn't take into account that many different factors determine the way parents um, parent their children. The second thing is, when you look at these infants who grew up in certain attachment styles, the way you interact with them, whether that be in therapy or psychiatry, it's very different. If you're a secure child, it's important to understand that that individual is very resilient, so you can have those harder conversations with that individual, opposed to a child that was very disorganized. When you're helping this individual later in life, it's important that you create a safe and stable place, both emotionally and physically, because it's most likely that individual didn't have that as a child, so it might be harder to work with later in adulthood. um, and again, when you're looking at it through a social worker's perspective, interventions are going to be the best tools we can use to help promote positive development in some of these attachment styles that we see earlier in life. Not only promoting more positive relationships, but it kind of prevents some of those emergent problems, or helps stop some existing problems from getting worse. And there's a quote that I really like that kind of, when as a social worker, I think it's important for us to understand our attachment styles to help navigate our relationships more effectively, um, just to foster those healthier connections as we grow up and develop from infants to adulthood.
So now we're going to present to you a video on the attachment theory. It just really kind of loops in some of the conversations that we've had during our presentation. I'm going to start it a little bit further into the video, just because the introduction doesn't really relate back to the content of our class. Oh, so sorry.
Hi, well, in the field, it delves into the theory of attachment, proposed by psychologist John Bowlby, which is a cornerstone in the field of developmental psychology. It delves into the profound emotional bond that forms between infants and their caregivers, emphasizing the crucial role it plays in shaping an individual's social and emotional development throughout their lifespan. To illustrate the theory of attachment, let's delve into the story of David, a 6-month-old infant, and his caregiver, Sarah. David and Sarah shared a strong and secure attachment, laying the foundation for David's emotional development. Since David's birth, Sarah consistently responded to David's needs with sensitivity and warmth. Whenever David cried, Sarah promptly attended to him, soothing him with gentle touch and nurturing words. David learned to trust that his caregiver would always be there for him, providing comfort and security. This secure attachment became the bedrock for David's exploration of the world. On one occasion, David encountered a new and unfamiliar situation. He attended a playgroup with other infants and their caregivers. David felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Sarah observed David's emotions and understood his need for support. David glanced back at Sarah, who smiled warmly, signaling encouragement. Filled with newfound confidence, David engaged with the other infants, gradually forming connections with his peers. As the playgroup continued, David encountered a small mishap that left him feeling upset. He immediately sought solace from Sarah, who swiftly picked him up and comforted him with a reassuring embrace. David's distress dissipated, and he felt secure once again. With Sarah by his side, David learned that he could face challenges and setbacks, knowing he had a safe haven to return to for comfort and support. David's secure attachment with Sarah continued to influence his emotional development in various ways. As he grew older, David demonstrated strong emotional regulation skills, displaying resilience in the face of adversity. He developed a positive self-esteem, having internalized Sarah's consistent and loving responses. David's secure attachment with Sarah provided a solid foundation for him to form healthy and secure relationships with others throughout his life. The theory of attachment also highlights the potential consequences of disrupted or insecure attachment relationships. Bowlby identified 3 main types of insecure attachment: avoidant, ambivalent, and disorganized.
So now we're going to move to the debrief portion of our presentation and kind of just recap some of the themes that we've talked about. So definitely attachment theory suggests how relationships developed in infancy might impact relationships throughout the rest of our lives. That's why we felt like it was very important to incorporate like how people show up in our practice can definitely be traced all the way back to attachments that they learned when they were infants. Next, this theory is not universal and cannot be applied across cultures. I think that's especially important to be in consideration of when we're working with folks who might have identities that are separate than ourselves or are engaged in cultures that we're not familiar with, and kind of just going in with an open mind and the way that they practice their lifestyles. And then, of course, attachment styles developed in infancy are not permanent and through intervention can be transformed from insecure to secure attachments. We wanted to highlight this one especially because I think sometimes the folks that we're working with might be, I don't know if stuck in their ways is a good way to put it, but an example of this is something that someone's been practicing for 30 years cannot be changed overnight, but through hard work and intervention, there's definitely some shifts that can be made. And so we have to keep an open mind about giving grace and room for folks to grow.
All right, and then we just have 2 discussion questions here to wrap up and think about what we've talked about today. So one of those is, in what ways might social workers support and impact attachment development in infants? And then the second being, how might culture, socioeconomic status, gender, et cetera, impact attachment in infants? And kind of just thinking how we as social workers can support diverse groups and people to ultimately form healthy and secure attachments for in their infancy, and then as time goes on to have healthier adults in our communities. Cool, and I think that's the end of our presentation. So thank you all for your time today.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thanks.